next speaker is Mike Hogan of Hogan Energy Consulting.
Good luck with the technology.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present a little overview on the technology involved in the various topics that have already been discussed. A number of items on my early slides have already kind of been covered, so I might just touch on them and move along to some of the more detailed aspects. Just quickly, I'm a Lakewood resident. I've been a resident in Chautauqua County for 30 years. My background is petroleum engineering. I started out as a well completion engineer and been involved in the hydrofracturing of probably 1,000 wells, give or take, in just about every state in the United States that produces oil and gas in 6 foreign countries. I know a little bit about it. There's certainly a lot of people out there that know a whole lot more than I do, but I'll try and give you my overview. Quickly, hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's referred to, is only a very small part of the whole program of natural gas or oil drilling. I am not a fracker, I'm an oil and gas man. This has already been shown, the Marcellus. I'm not going to go into it in detail, what the Marcellus is. We've already talked about that. Where it is in New York, there was some discussion. It's not going to take place in western New York. The zone is too shallow and it is too thin. I have a graphic. This is a well log from a well in Ellery Township. The Marcellus is 22 feet thick in this particular well, and it's only about 2,500 feet deep. It takes somewhere close to 100 feet of the shale development to be productive, and it has to be buried approximately 5,000 feet deep to get the pressure necessary. So the Marcellus is not going to happen in Chautauqua County anytime soon. Will somebody try it? Possibly, but it's pretty doubtful, and it's not just from my experience, but it's pretty well thought of in the industry as not being a productive zone in Chautauqua County. However, there's the Utica shale. It was touched on a little bit. In fact, I have one of the same slides, I think, that I was shown earlier. Maybe not in as much detail, but it does underlie us. It is probably deep enough, and it is probably thick enough to be tested. What is the Utica shale? Well, geologists have considered the Utica shale long to be an oil and natural gas source rock. There's a great quantity of natural gas and oil in the Utica shale. It's more geographically extensive than the Marcellus. It is also thicker, and it has yielded commercial production in Ohio. There's a lot of wells being drilled in Ohio, in western Pennsylvania, extreme western Pennsylvania, and also in West Virginia. And there are same technology is being used in the Marcellus. I think we've already been through this slide. So if it's possible that it's productive here, and the jury's still out, there's only about 7 or 8 wells, a handful of wells, that have penetrated this deep in Chautauqua County. And of those wells, there's only 1 or 2 that really yielded a lot of information because they were drilled for other deeper targets, and the logs that were run, the data that was gathered, wasn't focused on the shale at the time. So they're essentially minor data points. We can kind of calculate how thick the zone is, but we can't really tell the other necessary components to make it a viable resource. There's 1 or 2 wells that would lead one to believe that there's some potential, and it will undoubtedly be tested in Chautauqua County. How will it be drilled? It won't be drilled with the old drilling rigs that you've seen in the neighborhoods for 30 years in Chautauqua County. It'll be drilled with a rig like this. This well is being drilled down in Pennsylvania, or was being drilled down in Pennsylvania this past summer. It'll be drilled with a closed loop drilling system, which was touched on earlier and which is outlined in the GEIS, or the SGEIS. But it's being done almost everywhere now, closed loop drilling. The old open pits are pretty much becoming a thing of the past in the industry, not only in states that are requiring it, but other states that don't require it. It's just a better, safer system. And in this particular area is the mud system. And this drilling mud is moved from well to well. It's reused, reprocessed, and reused over and over and over again. This rig's much larger, and it has some other capabilities. It can move from wellhead to wellhead. So if it's on a drill pad and you're drilling a number of wells on the pad, it can literally walk to the next well site, which might be 10 or 20 feet away. So it saves days of disassembly and reassembly, truck traffic, and everything else to move this rig. It's all high-tech. Almost all the pipe handling systems are automated, which is much, much safer place for the folks that are working on the rigs. Most of the equipment is computerized. I have literally sat in my office, and if I wished, I could have controlled a drilling rig drilling in Alberta, Canada. That's how technical this equipment is. It's the same technology that's been used offshore and throughout the world. I think you may see this slide again. It's pretty well known. It's just an example. In my case here, I'm showing why horizontal versus vertical. And I agree that the shales, the best way to develop the shales is horizontal to effectively fracture them. However, you can produce them with a vertical well, just not as effectively. So we'll talk a little bit about that. In my example, this area represents about 1,000 acres. To effectively drain this, it would take approximately 24 wells. And it would take up at least 60 acres of disturbed land. In horizontal drilling, we can drain it with 6 wells drilled from one pad, taking up 6 acres. How will we do that? And everybody, or almost everyone, has touched a little bit on the well construction. I'll try and get a little more clarification on it. We will start off with a conductor hole. And there's numbers here, and they're pretty hard to see from where you're all sitting probably, but the numbers vary according to operator, the size of the casing. But essentially, a conductor casing will be run. In this case, it's 24-inch. And it run to 50 or 100 feet, wherever bedrock is, and it'll be cemented in place. The next string is what we call the surface string, and it'll be run in this area probably 500 feet, give or take a little bit. And it will be run in the hole and also cemented. The difference, and it was touched on briefly, under the GEIS, and which is now standard operating procedure throughout the industry, a cement bond log will be run. It's a sonic tool that will be run in the hole, and it will clarify the fact of the bond between the casing and the cement and this formation in the cement. If there's any imperfection, there's remedial operations that will have to take place before that well can go forward. The next step will be to drill an additional hole. This particular slide shows it being about 1,000 feet. In Chautauqua County, it'd probably be, depending on whether you're in the north part of the county or the south part of the county, 3,000, 2,500, I would say, to 4,000 feet, and it would cover the Medina Formation. This intermediate string of casing would also be cemented all the way back to surface, as was indicated earlier, and another cement bond log also run on this, so now it's a third string protecting water. The next step will be to drill to the kickoff point where the well starts to go horizontal. At that point, special tools are run in the hole, drill motors that are actually turning the bit hydraulically, and we use what we call a bent sub, and we gain about 8 degrees per 100 feet of angle until we could become horizontal. Pretty much 90 degrees, some a little more, some a little less. Some formations will come in the bottom and gradually work up. There's various ideas there and where's the best place to cross the formation. Once the well is completely drilled horizontal, and it could be 3,000 feet horizontal to 10,000 feet horizontal. I'm involved in projects right now in North Dakota, and all of the wells are at least 10,000 feet horizontal. Once the horizontal section is drilled, casing will be run 5.5 inch, 4.5 inch, it depends again on the operator, and that too will be cemented back. So now we're ready to move into the completion phase. So let's look a little more at that aspect. Hydraulic fracturing, we talked about it, and everybody's gone on with it. It's the essential part of the exploration process. as I speak today, about 80% of the natural gas that we're using that's keeping us warm comes from wells that have been hydraulically fractured somewhere in the United States or Canada. If we banned hydraulic fracturing, we better get the fireplaces roaring, because that's the only choice you're going to have. Even some of the large offshore wells, by the way, are hydraulically fractured. It's been used for more than 50 years, and actually I just saw something that came across my desk today. We're celebrating the 65th anniversary of the first well that was hydraulically fractured. It occurs deep underground, beyond freshwater aquifers, isolated layers, cement, steel, and a lot of hard rock. It's a finite part. It's just one portion of the project of drilling a well. How do we start that project? Well, first off, we have to get holes in the casing at the zone that we're going to treat. Somebody mentioned an explosive thing. It is an explosive. It's a device like this, many of these placed in what we call a gun. And this is a shaped charge, much like they use when they tear down a building with explosives. And it puts a hole in the casing. And that hole is one of these. This is an actual perforation of a casing, and that's all the bigger each individual hole is. You saw a version of this slide earlier. In my version, both wells are in the shale zone. And I want you to think of it this way. A horizontal well is not one big well, but a series of vertical wells. If we drill one vertical well, we fracture it, and we drain this area. When we drill a horizontal well, we are now able to drain this entire area with essentially one well. But what is that well made up of? It's made up of multiple completions. So how do we do that? We go in with that perforating gun all the way to the end. We shoot holes right here. We frack that zone. The amount of fluid and the amount of sand we put in there is about the same as what we put in here. 80,000 gallons, maybe 100,000 pounds of sand. Next, we put a plug in. We come back in with a perforating gun, and we perforate this zone. We frack that zone the same way. Put another plug in. Move to the next zone. And completely, with this particular one, there's 6 zones. Could be 20 zones. It depends on the length of the lateral. So they're all individual. This is another little slide of it. It shows the plugs. So now we've got a whole lot of plugs in a well, nothing can flow out. We come in with generally a coiled tubing rig, very flexible rig, with a drill bit on the end, and we literally drill all these plugs out. Only then can the gas flow out of the well. Once those plugs are drilled out, the well flows back. A certain amount of the fluid comes back, and it's not contained in open pits anymore. It's contained in steel pits, and it's hauled off location. It's not stored in ponds and it goes directly to storage in steel pits. And generally, in Pennsylvania, there's companies now that are recycling 100% of their flowback water. Range Resources, Cabot Oil and Gas, they recycle 100% of their water. Others are recycling nearly 100%, and they're working on recycling all of it. It's economics as well as the environment. So what's good, and frankly, I think that the environmental argument has been wonderful because it's made our industry look at things that we never looked at before. And it's made us work harder to develop new technology. And it's opened the door for so many new people to come into our industry. The largest group of people that are being hired right now after petroleum engineers and geologists is environmental engineers. And they're really carrying the ball for developing this new technology. What does this whole process look like on the surface? This is an aerial view of a frack job. This particular pad has 10 wells on it. And we're fracturing 2 wells back to back. We go back to that process where we ran into each zone. So we'll come into the first well, will perforate the farthest zone out and fracture it. While that zone's being fractured, they'll move over to this next well and start perforating it. And when that's done, they'll move back to this well. They'll be back and forth until all the wells on the pad are fractured. 2, 3, maybe 4-week process, depending on the number of wells on the pad. And this is what the rest of the surface looks like. 30,000 horsepower pumping equipment, a lot of equipment. But by doing what we call zipper fracks, fracking all the wells back and forth, we don't have to move this equipment in and out for every well. It all stays on location and the process continues on. Instead of moving the equipment, they move the crews in and out in vans. All of that equipment is controlled from one computerized control van. The engineers that are running the job sit in this van. Everything is remote control. Every piece of equipment here can be controlled from that van, and it's all geared to be fail-safe. So if there's a tiny leak anywhere, the whole thing shuts down. The chemicals. There's a whole list of chemicals. It's pretty hard to see here. I gave some handouts, and they're listed in there. It's not 600 chemicals. This is from, I took the top off of it from the company, but this was from an actual frack job. This job used almost 4 million gallons of water. It put in 5 million pounds of sand placed in the well total. It's probably about a 22-stage frack job, give or take a little bit. If you total up the chemicals that were used, and most of these chemicals are used to treat the casing. They don't treat the well bore. They don't treat the formation. The water, the hydraulics, you cannot compress a liquid. That's what creates the fractures. The purpose of chemicals is to just make the water slippery or to treat the pipe. In this case, if you total up the gallons that is here, and you calculate about 8 pounds per gallon for typical chemistry, it would total up to be about 24 tons, not 200 tons or 400 tons as suggested earlier. After the well has been completed, it's ready to go online, the location is reclaimed. This is early in the stage of a location being reclaimed. This is 1 year later. This is a more recent well. I took this picture a couple of weeks ago down in Pennsylvania. It was about 5 below zero. This is a 5-well pad. Each well is individually metered and has what we call a gas production unit. Each one of these units, there's one unit for each one of the wells, and a tank battery and an individual tank for each well for any fluids that are separated in these units. They have a heater in them to keep the gas from freezing as it goes through the measurement devices. This pad was started last fall with the drilling. It's been seeded. You can't tell here, obviously, with 2 feet of snow on it, but there'll be some additional trees put in. There's still some equipment back there that'll be removed. But it took I think this was started in September, and it's completed now. So it's not a process that's going to go on for years. There's no advantage to sitting here holding out. You come in, get the job done, and go to the next well. So what's really happening in Pennsylvania? What are some of the economics? This is from the Pennsylvania Labor Department data. It was effective in the second half of 2013. At that time, there was 231,969 jobs directly related to the development of Marcellus. The core industries were 35% higher in 2013 than what they were in 2010, Q2. Core industries, what are they? Crude and petroleum natural gas extraction. That's the engineers, geologists, company executives, landmen, they're all involved. Average salary, $110,000. Natural gas liquefaction extraction, which we're probably not going to see here in western New York, but is prevalent in extreme western, southwestern Pennsylvania, where there's a liquid content in the gas. People that operate those systems, average salary $100,000. Drillers, people that are working on the rigs, drillers, rig hands, tool pushers, average salary $84,000. Support activities, truck drivers, bulldozer operators, road crews, $70,000. Pipeline and related structures, pipeline crews, $82,000. Pipeline transportation, natural gas, the people that operate the pipelines and compressor stations, about $85,000. So the average core wage in Pennsylvania is $83,300. Just a quick fact, production and this is some newer data, this is at the end of 2013. Production was 2 trillion cubic feet of gas. Pennsylvania, I think, is the second largest producer now in the United States of natural gas. Number of wells, 8,900, and that includes conventional wells that were new and active. Total jobs have gone up now to 239,000. Tax revenue, $1.8 billion. Royalty payments to landowners, $567 million. Bonus payments, $1.2 billion. This is for 1 year. What about New York? Well, let's look at New York just quickly. I know I'm running out of time. I apologize. New York has a different tax structure in Pennsylvania. We do not have a state severance tax, at least not yet. We have an ad valorem tax. And the ad valorem tax is a tax that comes back to the communities. All the wells that are out here are taxed on an annual basis, and that tax comes to the counties, the townships, and the local school districts where the wells are located. It certainly helps relieve consumer tax burden and supports essential services, schools, and libraries. So we made a model. What would happen in New York if we took real data from wells literally a stone's throw across the border in Pennsylvania? And this is kind of what we came up with. So our parameters, we used wells from this part of Pennsylvania, and we used 117 wells, literally along the border. And we picked wells that had been online for at least 100 days, so they weren't in their initial production where they had a big spurt of production. Production had settled down, and those 117 wells average about 3.5 million cubic feet a day each. We used the ad valorem tax structure in New York. We assumed the wells are horizontal, and we put a drilling project that would be most likely to occur and that the DEC could manage. This is hard to see. It's in my handouts, but I've got a summary of it, but I'll just walk through it quickly. 360 wells would be drilled on 40 pads with 9 wells per pad, 6 acres per pad. The production amount we talked about. It would produce 465 billion cubic feet of gas in these 3 counties. And the counties would probably be Broome, Chemung, I think Tioga, New York. And we would produce, or it would have a tax assessed value of $4.7 billion. Local taxes for those 3 counties would be $132 million. State taxes would be about $47 million. And federal taxes would be about $115 million. We would probably produce about 7,500 jobs in those 3 counties that year to drill these 360 wells. So I'll summarize it. Oh, and one small thing I left out. The annual royalty payments to landowners would be about $280,000. I'm sorry, $280 million. Key points, $132 million of property taxes staying locally in the counties. Utilized land, 6 acres per pad, 240 acres of total disturbed land. Taxes per acre, $550,000. Taxes per multi-well pad, $3.3 million, and 7,500 high-paying jobs. Natural gas development safely benefits consumers and the communities. It doesn't rely on tax subsidies to operate, and it relies on facts and science not publicity stunts or hype or emotion, which there's a lot of in this whole issue. I will say that many of the presentations made a lot of issues. I think that there's going to be road traffic. It will be addressed by the companies. If you talk to the county executive in Bradford County, Pennsylvania, he will tell you that their roads in Bradford County, Pennsylvania are better now than they ever were, and it's one of the most heavily drilled counties in Pennsylvania. The companies have been rebuilding the roads better than what they started out with. In most cases, they're rebuilding the roads before they start the drilling process to help themselves, of course, but everybody's finding much, much better transportation conditions. And I could go on and on. I'm not going to sit here and blow our horn on it, but I think a lot of the issues that were brought up, which are really good issues, are being addressed by the industry. And a lot of that goes because of the people who've raised issues. The industry's really responding to that. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Mike Hogan of Hogan Energy Consultant.
Good luck with the technology.
Final speaker of the night is Mary Hajdu, attorney at law.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Hajdu. I am an attorney that practices on my own, but for this particular project, I'm working of counsel with the law firm of Burgett & Robbins and with a law firm out of Bridgeville, Pennsylvania, Morassic and Polachek. They are from Washington County, Pennsylvania. That was the birthplace of the Marcellus boom. Obviously, shale gas drilling is on everyone's agenda, and I want to talk a little bit about why there is such hoopla. First and foremost, we do need to take into account that shale gas drilling has done what 40 years of governmental incentives and regulation have failed to do. Basically, it has reduced our reliance on the unstable Middle East, reduced CO2 emissions, helped revitalize manufacturing, because it's a lot cheaper now to have manufacturing plants and power those plants. And we do need, as a society, a healthy manufacturing base. Manufacturing puts a lot of unskilled people to work so that they can have a decent standard of living. We've also seen real reduction in our energy costs. It doesn't seem like it this winter, but we actually have had real reductions. And we have replaced our dependence on dirty coal. I'm not going to go into this too much, but there is some hoopla about the workforce, and basically, as was previously said, nearly 250,000 jobs have been created in Pennsylvania, and these are solid jobs. These are jobs that often have on-the-job training, but require a high school diploma, clean driving record, clean drug test. They don't require as highly skilled positions as you might think, and these are certainly livable wages. Municipalities have benefited greatly in Pennsylvania with this drilling. This is, one guy told me it's sort of like a Walmart coming to your town, but without all the petty larcenies. And it's kind of funny, but basically these are companies who are coming in. They're not asking for tax rebates. They're willing to come in. They're willing to pay their taxes, and they're creating structures in your town that are worth millions of dollars that they will pay real property taxes on. And they do pay the real property taxes. The landowner doesn't pay that. The owner of the well pays that. And incidentally, because of that, Pennsylvania is really seeing a revitalization of their economy. They are third in the United States for corporate investment or corporate expansion. There's also a smaller economic impact, and I want to talk about that a little bit. This is an actual deal that was negotiated by our partners, Morassic and Polachek, down in Pennsylvania. This is important. This is an example of what can happen when you don't have a moratorium. In February of 2012, they started the Mercer County Landowners Group. By June of 2012, they received this offer and ultimately accepted this offer. This offer basically provided a 5-year option to drill, and for that, each landowner was paid the sum of $3,850 per acre for that 5-year option to drill. That's a lot different than what we're used to here in Chautauqua County with $1 an acre, $2 an acre, that sort of thing. In addition, they also received a gross royalty of 18.5%. We're used to a net royalty of 12.5%. Gross royalty means, of course, that none of the expenses are subtracted before the royalty is figured. And how do they do this? This is a whole different animal. The volume of gas that is taken out is so much different, so much greater than what we're used to with vertical wells. Certainly the technology is better. We don't have the risk of the dry hole like you had with the vertical wells, and so the landowners benefit greatly. The average Marcellus well in Washington County, where these folks were, paid royalties in the first year of production of $1,000 per acre per month. And certainly royalties will go down over time, but that can be life-changing royalties for some people. I submit to you that the real debate here is not about natural gas versus renewables. I would love it if we could power our way of life with renewables, but every responsible analysis out there has concluded the same thing. Renewables are not there yet. Really the debate is, and even the Sierra Club recognized this several years ago, the debate is natural gas versus coal. And we have slowly moved as a country from coal to natural gas. I'm not going to go over this too much. We've already seen this, but this is basically the 640-acre plat in the vertical versus horizontal wells. I want to talk a little bit about compulsory integration because I think it's important. Believe it or not, New York has a pro-drilling statute called compulsory integration. We have it, and so does North Dakota. To this extent, other states also have compulsory integration, but not as favorable to drillers as we have. And basically, what that provides is that if 60% of the acres in an area decide to allow drilling, then it can occur. And what I want to explain here is basically we have an actual map. This is what's called a spacing unit that was on file at the Pennsylvania DEC's office. And what occurs is after you sign your lease, maybe a year or two down the road, the company comes to you and says, look, we drew a spacing unit and it includes your property. And this is an example of how they look. They don't follow the property lines. They draw them from northwest to southeast because apparently there is a grain to the shale, and this allows for maximum drainage of the gas. The acres that are inside the red box are working for the landowners. So whatever acres you have inside that red box will produce royalties for you off of that well pad. They do not have to put the well site smack dab in the middle. There is a lot of play with that now because they basically go down into the formation and turn it horizontally. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to, where the well pad had to go exactly where the driller wanted it so that they could hit the pool. What will happen, and I think New Yorkers need to be aware of this, if drilling occurs here in New York and the moratorium is lifted, I respectfully submit you're much better off as part of a landowner group than with compulsory integration, because we as a landowner group negotiate higher royalties, better surface protections, better water protections, better insurance protections, lots of other protections that you would not have with compulsory integration. And in this particular example, the people who are in the landowner group would get royalties of about 18.5%. If you come in under compulsory integration, they're allowed to subtract off the cost of production. You're going to be down to a royalty of about 9 or 10%, so you're going to have roughly half the royalty that your neighbors would have if you're not in a landowner group. This is an example of a completed well site. New York is going to require those to be fenced and locked. I represent the Snowbelt Landowners Group, and we thought it was kind of funny when we came up with that name in the spring of 2013, but it doesn't seem so funny anymore. But basically, this is a joint venture with our Pittsburgh-based attorneys. Our Pittsburgh-based attorneys have leased almost 400,000 acres, signed thousands of leases, and not a single client has had an issue with water. And we think that's because they have some pretty stringent leases and a very, very stringent water clause in their leases. Our landowners are willing to lease, and we represent about 190,000 acres in Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny counties. We are not an oil and gas company. We do not represent oil and gas companies. We are truly independent of them. We feel that our job is to negotiate the best possible lease for landowners. We are not currently offering leases because, quite frankly, the bargaining position is horrible right now if you're a New York landowner. We have the moratorium. We did think we would be in a position last February to secure a lease, but it became clear that the moratorium wasn't going to be lifted, and we just were not able to get any decent offer to present to our landowners. We think that in many instances, the perspective of the landowners is not considered or is poo-pooed. And basically, landowners are voters and they are taxpayers. And they certainly care about their land. And I think that sometimes this cavalier attitude that is portrayed of landowners is really a bit of an insult to these people, because many of our landowners are very, very tied to the land. They raise crops. They have been in the same farm or house for generations, and they understand that any activity on the surface has to make sure that it doesn't interfere with their way of life, that they don't impair their quality or quantity of water, and that they don't end up with pollutants on the surface because they have crops and animals. The other thing that kind of gets lost in this debate, and I think it's very important to understand, is when you purchase your property, you purchase it from the surface to the center of the earth. There are many layers that either are valuable or potentially could become valuable. Unfortunately, back in the 80s, there were lots of leases that were done here in Chautauqua County. I'd say probably, maybe 75% of Chautauqua County is already leased. A lot of those leases, actually, back in the 80s, they're valid contracts, and they leased away from the surface to the center of the earth. I've seen tons of these leases, and people will bring them in, and I say, unfortunately, I can't help you because you'd already leased that away. What we do as a landowner group is we say, look, we have something called pew clauses that allow the drillers to go to the desired formation. In this particular case, it's probably the Utica shale. And then anything below that is released back. So suppose in 10 years a new layer becomes valuable. You want the ability to lease that out. Royalties have steadily risen over the years. 12.5% in the 80s was a good royalty. It was a decent royalty given all that the industry had to deal with. Now royalties are up around 18, 19, 20%. And why lock yourself into a specific royalty percentage now when that could change in the future? We believe that the fracking can be done safely. We do think there were mistakes in other states, particularly Pennsylvania. We do think New York has learned from those mistakes. And we do think that with the oversight envisioned by the DEC, that we can have a very productive business relationship with the drillers. I just want to kind of stress to everybody, I don't think anybody studied this more than the DEC. They are probably the world's authority on this, and I think they know what they're doing. Obviously, the state has to fund it. They have to fund the oversight, but we think it can happen. So why is this topic so controversial? And I think part of that is the history of the industry. Historically, as I indicated, you didn't, as a landowner, have any choice where that well pad went. So, people would say, gee, it's right off my back porch or things like that. And that kind of left a sour taste in people's mouth. This is different. You do have choices. In the particular lease that we negotiate, we give the landowner the choice of where the well pad will be. You have the right to reasonably refuse the location of the well pad. The leasing of the old way was different. It was a structure that really did not give landowners a whole lot of bargaining power. Leasing the old way basically involved a landman knocking on your door. The landmen generally were not permitted to cross out things in that standard lease that they gave you, that leased away from the surface to the center of the earth. They were allowed to offer you $1 an acre for a 5-year option to drill. They couldn't offer you $38.50 an acre. There was no real negotiation. You had no right to audit the well production. You basically couldn't fashion your own royalty. You didn't have any particular water protection clauses in there, and certainly no pew clauses, meaning you leased from the surface to the center of the earth, and you didn't have any protections against shut-ins, because shut-ins can happen with natural gas drilling. This was an industry that was started by wildcatters. It didn't require a whole lot of money to start up, put a hole in the ground, and hopefully something good happened. This was an industry that historically didn't have the oversight that we're talking about here today. New York has 5,000 natural gas wells. There's 11,000 gas wells in the entire state. 5,000 of them are right here, and I can guarantee you none of those wells were built to the standards that we're talking about with the hydrofracking, the horizontal hydrofracking. Why do we think this is different? The cost of entry into this business is huge. This is a much different game. These are not wildcatters. These are some of the biggest names in the oil industry that are involved in natural gas industry that are involved in exploration. Basically, they spend anywhere from $5 to $8 million per well. What you're looking at here is a graphic of a company called Exco, and they are detailing all of their plans for their wells in the Pennsylvania. Notice none of them are in New York, they're in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. And basically, this graphic shows a multi-billion-dollar investment into these rural counties. These are larger companies. They do have a reputation risk. A lot of them are traded on the markets, and as was said earlier, there is market pressure to clean up their act a little bit. And in addition, a lot of these companies want to work with landowner groups. There was just recently a landowner group of 110,000 acres that 4 companies went together and leased. And those, when you're negotiating on behalf of 110,000 acres, you can get a lot of protections in those leases. It's a lot different than negotiating for your 40 acres or 100 acres. Many of these landowner groups have special provisions like bonding, insurance, certain hold harmless agreements, shifting the burden of title examination to the drillers. Those are all important legal protections for the landowners. As I said, we do think this will be different. Basically, we do think that New York is not going to allow open pits or ponds. I understand from the governor's office that basically they're going to make everyone go to a closed-loop system, and I think that is a huge environmental plus. The governor's office recognized that. Most of the problems that happen in Pennsylvania happen for 2 reasons. One is open pits and ponds, and the other is inadequate inspection during the casing process. The open pits and ponds are significant. This technology started in Texas, where it was very dry and sparsely populated. And what they would do is pump out that spent frack water, put it in these open pits. On the surface, there were rubber-lined pits. It would evaporate. They'd roll up the rubber and be on their way. Well, when you come to Pennsylvania and you try to do that, you basically are putting spent frack fluid into a wet ground, or wet rubber-lined ground. We have snow melt, we have spring rains, and it's inevitable something like that's going to flood and create contamination. That's why we won't allow open pits or ponds here in New York, and we shouldn't. That's a very significant environmental plus. Also, New York is going to have significant casing redundancy, as was already indicated in the prior slides. I am told from that the governor's office is going to insist on something like 13 inspections during the casing process, as compared to Pennsylvania. One of the drillers told me they have 2 or 3 inspections during the casing process. Basically, the old wells were never built to these standards, and we do think it can be made safe. We also provide for certain things like the right to audit the well's production to make sure that what they report as the well's production is indeed the production, make sure that whatever is reported as the production of the well, as far as value goes, is fair market value, not what they sold the gas to their subsidiary for. So there's lots of legal protections that can be negotiated and routinely are negotiated now in this industry. This is a different industry. We also have very stringent water and surface protections and well site approval. Some of the examples are, especially with the water, we have mandatory water testing before and after. We have an actual clause in our lease that says If there's any change in either quality or quantity of water, it is presumed to be caused by drilling activities, so you don't have to litigate that issue, and they must replace the water. And it specifically spells out how they must replace the water. Can't put a tank on the yard. These companies are willing to agree to these terms. We also require special things on surface restoration. You want the topsoil put down last so you can plant your crops. Certain things such as an ad valorem real property tax that they typically agree to, which is if you have drilling on your 100-acre farm and now the value of your 100-acre farm doubles and your real property taxes double, we have a provision in the lease that says, okay, driller, you caused this increase in my real property taxes. I'll pay 18.5%, you pay the rest. And those are things that they're willing to do. We even have a kind of a funny thing. We have some areas, ski areas, for example, do not want any drilling in winter. Golf areas do not want any drilling in summer. They're willing to negotiate those types of terms. And there's even a group of Allegheny County deer hunters who say no drilling during deer season. And believe it or not, they put those things in these leases. This is all about creating a good, solid business relationship between landowner and drillers. Landowners have the gas. They would like to take into market. They would like to be paid royalties. The drillers want to extract that gas, so they have to come to some sort of mutually beneficial agreement. Some of this is repetitory, but basically we've all said we think the Utica is a real target, not the Marcellus. And basically, this is one of the most lucrative shale plays in the world. And we need to be aware of that. This is a very, very substantial asset that we have, and we are right here in the midst of it. I do think New York is missing the boat. New York has lost the opportunity. Basically, the drillers do not have to come here to do business if they don't want to. All of these dark areas are other shale plays. Chesapeake was knocking at our door 2 years ago. They wanted to come in and they wanted to drill here very badly. ExxonMobil actually sent one of their representatives to the Ioga conference at Peak and Peak 2 years ago to let everyone know that it was interested in our area. They're not here anymore. Chesapeake's gone to Kansas. And I think New York is missing out. Sure, maybe they'll come around to us, but I think New York has really created an anti-business environment, and it's going to take some time before they trust us again and are willing to come back. They don't have to do their business here, but guess what? We have to import roughly 95% of the natural gas that we need in the state of New York. And you know where that 95% of that gas comes from? Other fracked gas. And usually it's from Canada, Ohio, West Virginia, or Pennsylvania. So basically, it is a crazy business policy where we have to import all this gas, and we are not paying a dime of royalties to New York landowners. That money is all going out of state. I would submit to you that we don't really, as New York, as a business state, have a history of totally precluding a business or an industry. There's very few that we outright ban. Basically, we look for ways to allow commerce to thrive. We have, for example, a guy that I know who does a lot of these talks, he talks about, driving in New York. If we didn't have oversight and enforcement, and we didn't have vehicle inspections and road rules and laws and that sort of thing, driving could be like driving in Bangladesh. It's probably a very dangerous thing to drive in Bangladesh. But in New York, we found ways to regulate it. We found ways to oversee it, and it has become a relatively safe activity. Same thing with nuclear medical waste. Same thing with vaccines. We found ways to find a happy medium where we do not now ban an industry. Basically, what I wanted to get across is I think we're in danger of constructing sort of a Great Wall of China around New York State. I do think New York is missing out. I think New York landowners are missing out immensely. And basically what happened with China was they sort of had the idea that we know more and we are a superior society, so we'll erect this wall. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, the rest of the world flourished beyond their walls, and they did miss out, and they were held back, for quite a long time. I think we are having that proverbial China wall built around us. I think there are significant economic and political forces at play that make it more desirable that we produce natural gas. Russia, for example, supplies all the natural gas to Great Britain. Do you wonder why Great Britain was not up in arms about what recently happened in the Ukraine? They couldn't. Certainly, we are poised to be a natural gas producer for other democracies around the world. We think regulations are effective. We want you to not forget the rights of the landowners. And basically, I want to talk just briefly about the local fracking bans. I would caution any municipality to do an actual ban. Think about it. Even the state of New York, who has all these attorney generals who can research the law, even the state hasn't enacted an out-and-out ban. We only have a moratorium. There is an issue here about whether you as a municipality are taking the property rights of your citizens. Do you really want to be the defendant in that lawsuit when you're talking about millions of dollars that potentially are being deprived? I don't think a fracking ban is wise, and I also think that it's not permitted under the New York statutes. Basically, the oil, gas, and solution mining law has said that oil and gas exploration is exempt from municipal home rule, meaning you can't. I don't think I don't think these town fracking bans are going to hold up. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything. One thing I'd like to get across to you is there's a guy named Art Buckley. He is a Wyoming County planning director. He has studied this. He's gone to many of these sites. He has done a lot of work on this, and he is willing to share his work with any other municipality. And basically, what he says is he doesn't recommend a fracking ban. I'm just going to go back. He basically says, there's lots you can do as a municipality. You can regulate things. You can regulate when the trucks are on the road so they're not out there when the school buses are out. You can regulate things like where the compression stations go, what they look like. Down here at the right is an example of a mobile compression station. You don't have to look at that. Here's another compression station that was actually, you can have a zoning law that says, look, if you're going to build a compressor station, you need to locate it in a particular area. It needs to look a certain way. This one looks like a barn. There's lots of things that can be done. There's also, at least Mr. Buckley believes, you can have certain bonding requirements so that you can protect your roads. I can tell you generally they do, in my experience with Pennsylvania, the roads have not been an issue. They do fix them, they do repair them. They want to get this resource out of the ground, and if that road isn't up to snuff, they will make sure it's appropriate so that they can get their traffic over it. Thank you.